I spent the entire night sewing, stitch by stitch, my daughter-in-law's wedding dress. My hands trembled from exhaustion, but I didn't stop for even a second. It was 3 in the morning when I pricked my finger with the needle for the umpteenth time, and a drop of blood fell onto the white fabric. I cleaned it gently, almost tenderly, as if the dress were something fragile. It was made of soft satin, with lace along the edges and a small ivory ribbon at the waist. Every stitch carried a piece of me, the weariness of my years, my love for my son Luis, and above all, the hope that this dress would become a symbol of something pure. I had always loved sewing, not for the money, which was never enough, but because every garment that left my hands carried a story. I had sewn for brides, for mothers burying their children, for little girls dreaming of growing up. And now, at 66, I believe sewing my daughter-in-law's wedding dress would be the final touch of my life as a seamstress, a gift of love, my way of saying, here you go. Daughter, I'm giving you the best of me. I never imagined what this dress would end up costing me. When I finally finished, dawn was already breaking. The house was silent. The smell of freshly made coffee kept me company as I folded the dress with almost religious care. I placed it inside the white garment bag, hugged it to my chest, and sat down for a moment. My back ached, my fingers burned, but my heart beat with that mix of pride and nerves that only a mother who has done something out of love can understand. I remember the day I met Valeria, my son's bride-to-be. She was beautiful, yes, but something in her eyes unsettled me from the very first moment. A coldness disguised as politeness, a smile without a soul. Luis was in love, and I didn't want to judge. He's young, I told myself. He will learn to love slowly. I never imagined his love would become my hardest test. At 9 in the morning, I took the dress and walked to her house. The sun was shining, and the sky was a clear blue that promised a day of celebration. I imagined how she would look in the dress, how Luis would gaze at her tenderly as she walked into the church. I felt like part of that moment, even if no one said it aloud. After all, that dress was an extension of my soul. I knocked on the door and heard her voice from inside. Come in. I entered. She was standing in front of the mirror in her robe, her hair down, her lips painted. Around her stood her mother, 2 friends, and another woman whom I later learned was a seamstress she had hired, just in case my work wasn't good enough. Good morning, daughter, I said with a tired smile. Here is the finished dress. I laid it on the bed with great care. The sunlight coming through the window illuminated the fabric, making the threads shine like gold. For a moment, I thought I saw emotion in her eyes, but no. She stepped closer, took the fabric between her fingers, and frowned. Is this what you sewed? Yes, I replied with pride. Every stitch is handmade. She let out a short, dry, almost mocking laugh. Do you really think I'm going to get married in this old rag you made? What are you saying, daughter? I asked, confused. This smells like poverty, she repeated, looking at me with disdain. Throw that ridiculous thing away. Her mother and friends laughed, as if they had been waiting for that moment. My throat closed. Luis was standing in the doorway. He looked at us, but he said nothing, not a single word. He only lowered his head in shame and stepped back. In that instant, something inside me broke. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't move a muscle. I just picked up the dress with trembling hands, folded it slowly, and said, I'm sorry for bothering you, daughter. It won't happen again. I walked out of the house holding the dress in my arms as one carries a lifeless body. The air outside hit my face, my eyes burned. The noise of traffic and distant laughter surrounded me. Everything felt strange, as if the world kept turning while I stood still. I walked without direction, not knowing whether to cry or laugh. I kept thinking about the hours of work, the needles, the threads, the hope I had sewn into every part. I kept thinking about one thing above all, my son's silence. That silence hurt more than any insult or cruelty. I sat on a bench facing the plaza, and for the first time in many years, I felt anger. A cold, quiet anger that did not shout, but burned, not because of Valeria, but because of myself for having allowed myself to believe that love was enough. But before we continue, I'd like to know if you've subscribed to the channel and if you're enjoying the video. It helps me see that you support me and appreciate my stories. Now, let's go on. The sun was beginning to set by the time I arrived home. I placed the dress on the table and stared at it for a long time. In the dim afternoon light, the fabric was still beautiful, and I thought, she doesn't deserve it, but this dress cannot die like this. I turned on the radio, tied my hair back, and sat down again in front of the sewing machine. That night, while everyone else slept, Rosa Jimenez stopped being the seamstress who endured everything in silence. She became a woman who knew exactly what she was going to do. And even though I didn't know it yet, that final stitch would mark the beginning of something no one, not even Valeria, would be able to undo. I didn't sleep at all. The dress lay spread across the table, illuminated by the soft yellow light of the oil lamp, and I stared at it without blinking, as if it were a mirror reflecting my own life. Every thread, every stitch held a story. Entire nights spent without eating just to save money. Dawn spent sewing, so I could pay for my son's schooling. Laughter shared with women who stitched dreams for others while their own stayed tucked away in the bottom of a drawer. How many times had I promised myself that one day I would sew something just for me? But life, so cunning, always found a way to remind me that mothers leave their own needs for later, and that later almost never arrives. I got up, made coffee, and opened the window. Outside, dawn was barely rising over the rooftops. The streets were still asleep. The air smelled of freshly baked bread and promise, but in my chest there was only exhaustion. The steam from the coffee fogged the glass, and when I wiped it with my hand, I saw my reflection. I looked old, not because of age, but because of life itself. Because of the tears I had swallowed so my son wouldn't worry. Because of the arguments I avoided by keeping quiet. Because of the dreams I carried alone. I sat back down beside the dress. My fingers brushed the fabric, and I felt the softness of the satin blend with the weight of memory. I remembered the first dresses I ever made when I was just 17. My mother had taught me to use a needle when I was a child. A well-made stitch, she used to say, can unite more than fabric. It can unite lives. And she was right. With my sewing, I fed my family, I clothed half the neighborhood, and I earned the respect of women who called me Dona Rosa with equal parts affection and admiration. But it wasn't all work. There was love, too. I remember the day I met Hector, my husband. He was a simple man with big hands and a shy smile. He came to the workshop one day to fix a broken door and ended up staying the whole afternoon, watching me sew in silence. It must be beautiful to create something out of nothing, he said before leaving. And that's how it began, with a sentence and a shared silence. We were together for 35 years. We were never rich, but we were happy. Hector used to tell me that my laughter was worth more than any jewel, and that my hands were his greatest treasure. When he died, I promised myself I would keep going for him, for Luis. Luis was my pride, my only child. Ever since he was little, he was bright, curious, kind. I remember how he would run to show me his drawings, how he'd hug me when I came home from work, how he used to say, "Mama, when I grow up, I'm going to buy you a house facing the sea." I always smiled, knowing I didn't need that. I already had everything, his love. But love changes with time. The sweet boy became a distracted man, lost in his own world. And even though I understood it, even though I knew life was pulling him away, it still hurt to see him become so distant. When he met Valeria, I saw something in him dim. It wasn't that he didn't love her. It was that with her, my son became a man who needed permission even to be good. I watched quietly, because at my age you learn that speaking doesn't always help. Sometimes you just wait and see what remains when the noise fades. That night, with the dress in front of me, I understood that I had waited too long, that my silence had been mistaken for weakness, that my kindness had been taken for granted, and that young woman, the arrogant girl who called me poor, had not humiliated me alone. My son had allowed it. That truth hurt more than any needle ever had. I turned on the radio. An old song, one Hector used to hum while fixing things around the house, began to play. When the soul grows tired, it stitches memories together so it won't break, the lyric said. I cried, not for Valeria, not for Luis, but for myself. For the first time, I felt empty. I felt I had given everything I had, and still it wasn't enough. Then I remembered something my mother told me before she died. When a woman is forgotten by her own, She must remember who shaped her. I stood up, walked to the old wardrobe where I kept my most valuable fabrics, reserved only for special work, and took out a wooden box. Inside the box were pieces of old lace, a blue ribbon Hector had given me on our anniversary, and a piece of white fabric I had never touched before. I spread it out on the table and smiled. I didn't yet know what I would do with it, but something in me had changed. I was no longer the seamstress who apologized for existing. I was a woman who had learned, through pain, that dignity, too, is sewn stitch by stitch, without hurry and without fear. The next day dawned gray, but inside me there was a new kind of clarity. I took the dress Valeria had despised and hung it by the window. The wind moved it gently, and for a moment it seemed to breathe. I thought about how something so beautiful could be rejected simply because it came from calloused hands, from a humble life. And then I felt it deep in my chest, that one day she would understand what she had thrown away. Because what is made with love cannot be destroyed by words, it can only be transformed. And I, although tired, still knew how to transform things. I sat in my chair, prepared fresh thread, and turned on the lamp. The sound of the sewing machine filled the house, a steady, firm noise, almost like the heartbeat of someone who refuses to give up. I didn't know exactly what I was sewing this time, but for the first time, I felt I was doing it for myself. As the hours passed, the pain inside me began to mix with something unfamiliar, calm. It was as if each stitch were weaving my own skin back together. And there, between threads, needles, and silence, Rosa Jimenez found herself again. The woman whom time and poverty had tried to wear down was returning. And though I didn't know it yet, what I was creating that night would change my destiny forever, because some stitches don't bind fabric, they bind fates. The morning of the wedding arrived with a brilliant sun, the kind that seems to shine only for the wealthy. The sky was clear, and the air smelled of jasmine, expensive perfume, and hypocrisy. The church bells rang loudly, and on every corner of town people whispered. Everyone was talking about the grand wedding of Luis and Valeria. The perfect couple, they said. I listened to those comments from my window as I fastened the last buttons of my blouse. Of course, I was not officially invited, but I was going to be there, not out of pride or curiosity, but because something inside me needed closure. In the mirror, I saw my reflection. Hair neatly tied back, a calm face, and the black linen dress I always wore for important moments. It wasn't mourning, it was armor. And although my hands still bore the marks of needles and sleepless nights, they did not tremble. For the first time in a long while, they were steady. I left the house, walking slowly. Each step brought me closer not just to the church, but to the past I had finally decided to confront. Valeria's dress, my dress, remained stored in the workshop box, perfectly folded, scented with lavender. I hadn't destroyed it or sold it. No, its fate was not finished. When I reached the plaza, I saw the swirl of people, the flowers, the cars, the photographers. It all looked like something out of a magazine. Valeria wanted a fairy tale, and she had gotten one, or so she thought. I sat on a bench at the very back of the aisle, far from everyone. No one saw me enter, or rather, no one wanted to see me. The guests glanced at one another, smiling, radiant, as if all of them were part of something beautiful. Only I knew what lay behind those smiles: arrogance, disdain, appearances. A murmur rose when the bride's car stopped in front of the church. Valeria stepped out, magnificent, wrapped in a dress that gleamed under the sun. Not mine, of course. This one was a designer gown, pure white, soulless, without history, without a mother's hands behind it. And yet everyone sighed as she appeared. Her mother walked beside her, proud as a queen, and behind them my son Luis, his face serious, almost distant. That expression hurt more than any insult. There was no happiness in his eyes, only resignation. The priest waited for them at the altar, smiling. The choir began to sing, and I watched every detail, as if I were inside a slow-motion film. The flowers on the pews, the scent of incense, the glowing candles, everything looked beautiful, yes, but it was all a lie. As false as the words they were about to speak. And then, as Valeria walked down the aisle surrounded by applause and cameras, I remembered the hours of sewing, the blood that stained the fabric, the tears that fell on every stitch. And I felt a strange calm, not sadness, not anger, but a cold, sharp clarity, the kind that comes when someone already knows exactly what they're going to do. But before I continue, I want to know if you subscribe to the channel and if you liked the video. It helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. Now let's move on. When the ceremony ended, everyone went out into the courtyard laughing and tossing petals in the air. I stayed seated, watching the newlyweds pose for their photos. Valeria was glowing, confident in her newly conquered world. Luis looked at her, but his smile was weak. I wondered if, deep down, he also sensed that something in that story didn't fit. I stood up and walked into the empty church. My footsteps echoed against the walls. The altar was still lined with white flowers, and the midday light filtered through the stained glass windows. I approached a pew and sat down. There, in the silence, I closed my eyes and spoke to my husband for the first time in a long while. "Hector," I whispered, "you know I was never a woman of revenge, but this time I cannot stay silent, not for me, but for what we were and what we taught our son." A breeze shifted a flower on the altar, and it fell at my feet. I took it as a sign. Hours later, when everyone left for the reception hall, I returned home. I turned on the workshop lamp and opened the box where I kept the dress. The scent of the fabric wrapped around me. I ran my fingers over the lace, over every stitch, and smiled, not with irony, but with tenderness. There was something in that dress no one could see. My story, my love, my effort, my pain, and now my redemption. It wasn't an old dress. It was a symbol, and soon everyone would understand. I spent the entire night awake, sewing, adjusting, transforming, not for Valeria, not for Louise, but for myself. Every thread that passed through the needle was an unspoken word, an unshed tear, a promise to myself. By the time dawn painted the sky, the dress was finished, different, more beautiful, stronger, more mine than ever. I hung it in front of the mirror and looked at it. The reflection staring back wasn't of a humiliated seamstress. It was of a woman who, without raising her voice, had found the quietest, most elegant way to return every wound ever given to her. And as the sun entered through the window, I knew the next day would be unforgettable, not for me, for her. Because in life, some things are stitched with thread and others with destiny. That night, after leaving the dress ready, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't insomnia. No, it was something else. A kind of calm energy flowed through me, as if something was urging me to look beyond what was obvious. The house was silent, lit only by the dim glow of the workshop. The air smelled of new thread, freshly ironed fabric, and something else, something that had been waiting. I sat in front of the mirror with a cup of coffee in my hands. My eyes were tired, but inside me there was a peace I hadn't felt in years. I remembered Hector's words the night before he died. If you ever feel like the world is collapsing on you, look inside the wooden chest. Everything you need is there. I never fully understood what he meant. The chest had stayed closed for years in the attic, covered by old blankets and dust. I kept it out of nostalgia more than anything else. But that morning, something inside me whispered that it was time. I grabbed a flashlight, climbed to the attic, and turned on the hanging bulb. The air up there was heavy, filled with the smell of wood and time frozen in place. The chest sat in the corner, covered by a cloth. When I lifted it, dust rose like a ghost. I brushed my hand across the lid, feeling the marks of the years. The lock was rusted, but it gave way with a soft crack. Inside were folders, photographs, a St. Benedict medal Hector always carried, and a sealed envelope with my name on it. With trembling hands, I took it and went back downstairs. At the table, under the warm lamplight, I opened the envelope. Inside was a folded, yellow document and a letter written in his firm handwriting, the same handwriting I had seen thousands of times on the workshop list. The notes he left for me before going to work, the little I love yous he tucked into my pockets. Rosa, my love, if you're reading this, it's because life didn't give me the chance to tell you in person. I know you've worked your whole life, that you gave more than you received, and that the world was never fair to you. But I want you to know that everything we own, The house, the land, the workshop, the savings is in your name. I didn't do it out of distrust, but out of love. If one day our son forgets who you are, remind him that this house was built by your hands, not his. And if anyone ever tries to take what belongs to you, don't argue. Just smile, because nothing hurts more than a smile that hides the truth. I felt my heart pounding inside my chest. I pressed the letter against me and cried, not out of sadness, but relief. Even in death, Hector was still protecting me. I had always believed he left me with little, that he had handed everything over to Luis to secure his future. But no, everything was mine. Everything had been placed in my hands. I picked up the document and examined it carefully. They were the property deeds of the house where Luis and Valeria now lived. In my name. Only mine. Legally, that house belonged to me. And in that exact moment, something inside me shifted forever. What I felt wasn't revenge, it was justice. A quiet kind of justice, made of silence, years of unrecognized effort, and love transformed into dignity. I spent hours sitting in front of that paper, staring at my name written in ink. Rosa Jimenez, it said. I looked at it again and again, until those letters stopped being just a name and became a declaration. I exist. I matter. I am. Dawn arrived slowly. The sunlight entered through the window, giving a golden glow to the letter and to the dress hanging on the mannequin. For the first time in a very long while, everything in that room made sense. The past, the pain, the sleepless nights, everything was connected. And I understood then that Hector had planned it all. He had left the pieces of my redemption before he died, trusting that when the moment came, I would know how to use them. I got dressed, tied my hair back, and went out for a walk. The town was peaceful. The gossip about the wedding still echoed through the streets. Comments, laughter, comparisons. I walked among the people unnoticed, but inside me I carried a new kind of power, invisible yet strong, like a sacred weapon. I passed by Luis and Valeria's house. The garden flowers were withered. The windows were closed. I thought of the young woman who had dismissed my dress, who believed she had everything, money, youth, beauty, a husband. And yet, she lacked the most essential thing, roots. That house she slept in didn't belong to her, not the roof, not the walls, not even the floor beneath her feet. All of it was mine. I smiled, not with malice, but with a calm I had never known. Life had finally given me the chance to see everything from a different place, not from humiliation, but from the quiet power of someone who knows the truth and chooses silence. That evening, as the sun went down, I took the phone and dialed an old friend. Don Ernesto, the notary who had worked with my husband. Ernesto, this is Rosa Jimenez. Rosa, he exclaimed in surprise. How many years has it been? Many, I answered calmly. But I need to see you. I have a document I want to update. We met the next day in his office. I handed him the letter and the deeds. Ernesto reviewed them patiently, then looked up with a mixture of astonishment and respect. Dona Rosa, everything here is fully valid. The house is yours. And from what I see, your husband added a very clear clause. No transfer can be made without your authorization. Perfect, I said. I want everything in order. I'm not going to sell anything, but I need it registered. Ernesto looked at me curiously. Are you planning something, Rosa? I'm planning to reclaim what's mine my way. He smiled softly. I always knew you wouldn't stay quiet. You've always had that fire in your eyes. And fire, I said, doesn't go out. I answered, it only waits for the right moment to ignite. When I returned home, I opened the wardrobe and took out the dress. I hung it in front of the mirror and studied it in silence. I no longer saw it as a symbol of humiliation, but as a testament. It was my work, my story, my voice. And on the day of the ceremony, that voice was going to speak, because words can wound, yes, but silence filled with truth can bring down empires. And I, Rosa Jimenez, was ready to bring down theirs. I will never forget that day. The air smelled of flowers and lies. The whole town had gathered in the church, decorated like never before. White roses on the pews, candles glowing on the altars, soft string music floating through the air with an almost unreal serenity. It was the wedding of the year, they all said. The perfect wedding. I woke up early with a calm heart and a clarity sharper than ever. The dress. The one I had sewn with my own hands, and the one she had thrown aside, lay on the bed. It glowed in the morning light, transformed. I had spent countless nights rebuilding it, strengthening it, embellishing it, making it new. It was no longer Valeria's dress. It was mine. I touched it gently, remembering every cruel word she had thrown at me. This smells like poverty. I smiled. Yes, it did smell of poverty, but also of effort, of love, of history, of everything she would never understand. I dressed slowly, without hurry, as if each movement held a sacred purpose. The lace brushed against my skin as though recognizing its true owner. I pinned up my hair, wore the earrings Hector gave me on our wedding day, and added a small brooch with his initial that I had kept since he died. When I looked at myself in the mirror, for the first time in years, I felt beautiful. Not young, not perfect, beautiful. When I finished, the clock struck 11. The ceremony would begin at noon. I took a taxi and told the driver to take me to the church. I didn't need an invitation. When a woman has been humiliated in silence, her return to the place of her humiliation requires no permission. It is poetic justice. When I arrived, the noise was overwhelming. Guests crowded the entrance. Photographers snapped pictures of Valeria, who posed in her spotless new designer dress, smiling triumphantly. Louis stood beside her with a face carved in stone. I watched them from a distance. No one recognized me at first, perhaps because they could not imagine that the same dress their bride had rejected could be worn by the mother of the groom with such dignity. I walked toward the main entrance with steady steps. The murmurs faded little by little, as if even the air paused to look. Someone whispered my name. That's the groom's mother. And another, bolder voice said, "Why is she dressed like that?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The priest saw me enter and, surprised, said nothing. He simply gave me a small nod, as if he understood something the others were not yet able to see. I approached the altar and stood before the image of the Virgin. The choir kept singing, but the sound felt distant. I took a deep breath and waited. The church doors burst open, and there she was, Valeria, radiant, proud, beautiful like a painting, wrapped in her designer gown, surrounded by flashes and applause. But when her eyes met mine, everything changed. Her smile froze. The color drained from her face. Her bouquet trembled in her hands. Her whole body shuddered. Because I was standing at the altar wearing her dress, the very dress she had ordered me to throw away, the one she said smelled like poverty. And now, under the light that streamed through the stained glass windows, that dress shone with a majesty no designer garment could ever match. Every piece of lace, every fold, seemed to tell a story, my story. Valeria stepped back, stumbled against the edge of the aisle, and let out a strangled gasp. "This can't be," she whispered. Whispers spread among the guests like a rising wave. "It's the same dress. What does this mean?" Luis looked at me, bewildered, unable to understand what was happening. Then, without taking my eyes off his face, I stepped forward. I didn't need to raise my voice. Silence did the work of carrying my words. "I didn't come here to interrupt anything," I said calmly. "I came to keep a promise." The priest watched me with respect. "Dona Rosa." "Just 1 minute, Father," I replied gently. "Then I'll leave." I turned to the crowd and spoke slowly, every word measured, precise, unwavering. This dress was sewn by my own hands, stitch by stitch. I made it with love, with pride, believing that a young woman would wear it on the most important day of her life. But it was rejected. I was told it smelled of poverty. The crowd fell silent. No one breathed. Valeria stood frozen, pale, clutching her bouquet so tightly her knuckles turned white. "What many of you don't know," I continued, "is that the house where my children live today, the roof over their heads, the walls around them, was built with the same effort with which I sewed this dress. With my hands, with years of work and sacrifice. And that effort," I said, meeting Valeria's eyes, "also smelled of poverty." A murmur rippled through the church. Luis looked at me with tears in his eyes, and I gave him a faint, sad smile. "But I learned something," I went on. "What is born from love cannot be despised. It can be denied, mocked, humiliated but never destroyed. I turned fully toward Valeria, who could barely stand. You rejected this dress, hijab. You called it a rag. But this rag represents who I am, a woman who gave everything and asked for nothing. And today, by wearing it, I'm not doing it out of pride. I'm doing it to remind you that real luxury doesn't come from what you buy, but from what you create with your hands and with your soul. Valeria dropped her bouquet. It hit the floor just before she did, collapsing at the entrance of the church. A scream echoed through the temple. Guests jumped to their feet. The photographer dropped his camera, and Luis rushed toward her. I remained still, calm, as if time itself had paused around me. The priest, his voice trembling, murmured, "God bless you, Dona Rosa." And in that moment, I knew justice had already been served. I walked out of the church with my head held high. The air outside was cool, the sky clear. I walked slowly through the crowd as they parted in silence to let me pass. I didn't feel vengeful. I didn't feel triumphant. I simply felt free, because sometimes life gives you a chance to return what was done to you, not with shouting, not with hatred, but with elegance. And that elegance, stitched with pain and dignity, is the strongest thread a woman can wear. I will never forget the sound that filled the church after Valeria fell. It wasn't a scream, it was something louder. Silence. A silence so deep that you could hear the echo of the dress gliding across the marble floor. The guests stood frozen, unsure whether to run or stay in place. Luis, pale as a ghost, held his wife in his arms while the priest begged everyone to remain calm. I stayed at the altar, unmoving, my hands clasped, my eyes fixed on the crucifix. I didn't cry, I didn't tremble, I simply breathed. Because in that moment I understood that everything I had endured over the years, the humiliations, the quiet insults, the contempt, had led me precisely to this instant where my voice could no longer be silenced. The priest asked me to leave, saying the situation was getting out of hand, but I didn't move. I couldn't walk away without saying what needed to be said. I turned slowly toward the guests, who stared at me with a mixture of respect and shame, and I spoke, not with anger, but with the calm that only comes when the soul knows it has done what is right. "Forgive the scene," I said. "But since you are all here to celebrate love, allow me to speak about love." The murmur stopped. Every gaze fixed on me. "I believed in love my whole life," I continued. "In the kind of love that shows itself by working, caring, staying. A love that stays quiet to avoid hurting others. A love that wakes up early, that feeds, that mends, that endures. I believed in it so much that I stitched it with my own hands." I lifted the edge of the dress just enough for them to see. This dress I'm wearing wasn't made with money. It was made with patience. With the same hands that raised a child alone, that cured fevers, kneaded bread, wiped tears, and still it was rejected. Someone among the guests whispered, shameful. I continued, without lowering my voice. I was humiliated in silence, told that what I made smelled of poverty. "Dona Rosa, please." The priest tried to interrupt, nervous. I raised my hand gently. "Let me finish, Father. God knows I stayed quiet for too long." He nodded and stepped back. Then I looked directly at Luis, my son, the man I had given everything to, the child who once hugged me while I sewed, and said, "Mama, when I grow up, I'll take care of you." "Son," I said, my voice barely cracking, "I'm not here to shame you. I'm here to remind you. To remind you where you come from, who raised you, and that no wealth, no marriage, no last name is worth more than respect." Luis lowered his head. I saw his lips tremble, his hands gripping Valeria's shoulders as she lay unconscious. His tears fell freely. "The house you live in," I continued, "the walls that protect you, the roof under which you sleep. Your father and I built all of it, but legally, that house is mine." A wave of whispers rippled through the church. Valeria's friends exchanged startled glances. Her mother, seated in the front row, turned pale. "Yes," I said, raising the envelope with the deeds. "This is the truth I kept for years. Before he died, your father left everything in my name, not for me to use, but to protect it. And I protected it, son, even from you." Luis lifted his eyes to meet mine. There was pain, guilt, but also understanding, the kind that comes when the soul can no longer run from the truth. I did not do this to humiliate anyone, I said. I did it because I couldn't allow the love we worked for to be turned into shame. No mother, no woman, should ever feel that her effort is worth less than someone else's luxury. I tucked the envelope away and breathed. The air felt lighter, as if each word removed a weight I had carried for years. If I've learned anything, I said to the crowd, it's that poverty isn't in the hands, it's in the soul. And when someone looks down on something made with love, they don't reveal wealth. They reveal emptiness. A long silence filled the room. Only Luis's sobs and the creaking of the wooden pews could be heard. I walked toward him slowly and placed my hand on his shoulder. You still have time, son, I whispered. Time to understand, to love without shame, to lift your head without forgetting where you come from. Luis nodded, unable to speak. His tears fell to the floor, each one washing away a piece of the hurt between us. Then, without thinking, he embraced me, a long, sincere hug filled with regret. Forgive me, Mama, he whispered. There is nothing to forgive, my son. Only things to learn. When I stepped out of the church, the air struck my face. The sun was still in the sky, but everything looked brighter, cleaner. The murmurs of the town mixed with the wind. Some people looked at me with respect, others with astonishment, others with second-hand embarrassment. I didn't look at any of them. I walked straight, calm, my head held high. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt like I had completed something greater, like my story wasn't just mine, but belonged to every woman who had ever been called poor, old, useless, out of fashion, every woman who had cooked, sewn, cared, loved, and still been ignored. That afternoon, when I arrived home, the dress still lay on the bed. I hung it in the closet, not with sadness, but with pride. I touched it one last time and whispered to it as if it were alive. You have fulfilled your purpose, child. I sat by the window and watched the sunset. The sky carried the same shades as the thread with which I had sewn that dress, orange, gold, violet. And in that moment, I understood something it took me a lifetime to grasp. True wealth isn't kept in a safe, nor inherited through a will. True wealth is being able to look back without lowering your head. That was the legacy Hector left me, and I had finally used it. The morning after the wedding arrived with a gentle rain, as if the sky also needed to wash away everything that had happened. The drops tapped softly against the zinc roof of the workshop, a rhythm almost compassionate. I had been awake since before dawn, a steaming cup of coffee between my hands, my eyes lost on the horizon. The house smelled of moisture, thread, freshly pressed fabric, but also of something new. Freedom. I hadn't felt anything like it in years. A clean, deep calm, free of fear and silence. The whole town was talking about what happened, of course. Nothing stayed hidden for long, but I no longer cared. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of anyone's words. I knew I had done the right thing, not out of pride, but out of respect. For myself, for my husband, for all the times I had stayed quiet. And even though thinking of my son still hurt, I understood that sometimes falling is the only way to learn to look upward again. By mid-morning, I heard footsteps outside the door. I looked through the window and saw Luis. He was drenched, his suit wrinkled, his eyes tired, his face marked by a sleepless night. I opened the door without saying a word. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. We simply looked at each other, the sound of rain filling the silence. Mama, he said at last, his voice breaking. Come in, son. I gestured toward the table. He sat down, lowered his head, and covered his face with his hands. He was trembling. The wedding didn't happen, he murmured. I know, I replied, pouring him coffee. Valeria left. She said she couldn't stay here, that everyone looked at her with contempt, that you humiliated her. I looked at him quietly. And do you think they didn't humiliate me? Luis lifted his head, his eyes red. Mama, I tried to speak, he said, but stopped. Don't say anything, I interrupted softly. There's no need. I sat across from him. Life has taught you what my words never could. She asked me to choose, he said, staring into his empty cup. She wanted me to go with her to sell the house, to leave everything behind. And what did you tell her? I asked, my voice steady. I told her this house isn't mine, that it never was. For a moment, silence filled everything again. Luis took a deep breath, as if each word cost him a piece of his pride. I didn't defend you, Mama, he whispered. I didn't have the courage. I let myself be carried by the way she thought, by how she saw the world, and I drifted away from you. I took his hands gently. I raised you to be good, son, not perfect. And mistakes teach too. We spent a long time talking. Luis told me how Valeria had tried to save appearances, how her family demanded explanations, how shame had swallowed her whole. I listened, but without resentment, because deep down I knew that what was collapsing wasn't a person, it was an illusion. The illusion of superiority, of appearances, of contempt. And when that mask breaks, what remains isn't ruin, it is truth. Luis stayed at the house that night. We ate dinner in silence, just like when he was a child. I served him hot soup, and for the first time in years, he looked at me with the eyes he once had. There was something tender in his gaze, something that had been gone for a long time. Before going to sleep, he approached me and said, "Thank you, Mama." For what? For not giving up, for reminding me who I am. The following days were filled with whispers throughout the town. The neighbors came by with excuses to drop something off or greet me, but in truth, they wanted to know more. I simply smiled and served coffee. Some congratulated me for my courage. Others said I had been cruel. But all of them looked at me differently. I was no longer the old seamstress. I was Dona Rosa, the woman who faced contempt with dignity. The news spread through the market, the church, the town plaza. Words came and went, but I remained silent. I no longer needed to defend myself. When the truth is shown clearly, it needs no explanation. One afternoon, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was Valeria's. I opened it slowly. There were no insults, no excuses, just a few lines written in smudged ink. Dona Rosa, I don't know if I will ever be able to look you in the eyes, but I want to tell you that now I understand. No one ever taught me to value what is simple. I grew up believing money gave dignity, until I saw you wearing that dress. I had never seen anyone look so beautiful. If one day you can forgive me, I would like to speak with you. With respect, Valeria. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer. I didn't feel hatred or satisfaction, only peace. My lesson had reached exactly where it needed to. Life returned to its rhythm. The sound of the sewing machine filled the house once again. Sunlight streamed through the window while I worked quietly, sewing for the neighbors who now brought me small orders. I no longer needed money or recognition. I just wanted to keep living with a light heart. Luis returned to work in town, and slowly, our relationship healed. Sometimes he stayed for dinner, sometimes he slept at home, sometimes he just stopped by to say hello. And each time he hugged me, I could feel that his embrace no longer came from guilt, but from love. One Sunday, as I hung the dress in the patio to air it out, I paused to look at it. The lace shimmered under the sun, and the wind moved it gently. It looked alive. I thought about everything that dress had meant: pain, work, contempt, redemption. I smiled, because I finally understood that it had never been just a garment. It was my story, and by wearing it I had completed it. The fall had not been mine, it belonged to pride, to ego, to everything that tried to erase a woman's worth. And when pride falls, truth blooms. That night, before going to bed, I looked at Hector's portrait on the wall and whispered, "I did it, old man." I closed my eyes with a peace I hadn't felt in years and slept like someone who no longer owes anything to anyone. Weeks have passed since that day, and life flows again at its slow, steady pace, the way a sewing machine hums without rushing, without racing against time. The town still talks, because towns never fall silent, but now their words no longer matter. Every comment about me sounds different. Once it was mockery. Now it is respect. And even though I never sought it, it feels good to know that the truth prevailed without me needing to shout it. The workshop is full again, of fabric, colorful threads, and that sweet scent of soap and starch that has always accompanied me. The neighbors come asking for small repairs, a stitched tablecloth, a bit of advice. Others come just to talk, as if drawn to the calm I now carry. And I welcome them all with a smile and a hot cup of coffee, just as my mother did when life felt heavier than the work itself. Some nights, when the house is quiet and the only sound is the wind brushing the curtains, I like to sit by the old wooden chest where I found the deeds. I clean it gently, touch it as if it were a beating heart. Inside, I keep Hector's letter, the deeds, and Valeria's letter, 3 papers that summarize 3 lives. The man who taught me love, the son who taught me forgiveness, the woman who taught me respect, though she learned it late. Sometimes I think of Valeria, not with bitterness, but with tenderness born from understanding. She was young, yes, arrogant, yes, but she was also a victim of a world that taught her to look down on those who work with their hands. Maybe if she had had a mother like mine, she would have learned that real wealth isn't stored in a bank, but in the soul. A few days ago, another letter from her arrived. Longer, humbler. She wrote that she had started working as a seamstress in a fashion shop. Now I understand why a badly sewn stitch hurts so much, she wrote. I smiled, not because her remorse pleased me, but because I understood the thread of life had come full circle. She too was learning to sew and to mend her own story. Luis, for his part, became the son I remembered. He no longer spoke from guilt, but from affection. He comes to see me every day, fixes things around the house, helps me in the garden. Sometimes he sits in my workshop and watches me sew. He doesn't say a word, he just observes. And in his silence, I feel an apology that no longer needs to be spoken. One afternoon he said to me, "Mama, I want you to know something. I've decided to stay with you. I'm not leaving anymore." I smiled. "You don't have to stay, my son. Just promise me that if one day you leave, it will be without forgetting what you learned here." He hugged me tightly, and in that embrace, I knew my work was done. The dress, the very dress that changed my destiny, still hangs in the wardrobe. I took it out recently to air it, and I stood staring at it for a long time. The fabric has lost a bit of its original shine, but it remains beautiful. Every fold, every lace, every stitch tells a story. My story, the story of a woman who was scorned, who fell, who rose again, and learned that dignity does not need witnesses. Sometimes I think of the dress as a scar, a mark of something that hurt, yet also proof that the wound healed. Scars are meant to be hidden. They are worn with pride because they remind us that we survived. And just as a wound closes with time and care, I too healed mine. With thread, with patience, with self-love, with the same love I had used to weave the dreams of others. A few days ago, I decided to start a new project. Nothing big, something just for me. I am sewing a new dress. It's not white, not for a celebration. It's a soft blue, the color of the sky at dawn. As I thread the needle, I think of everything I was, everything I lost, and everything I gained. Every stitch is a prayer. Every thread, a word left unsaid. Every fold, a promise to myself. When it's finished, I will hang it on the same hanger where the other dress once rested. Beneath it, I will leave a note, a simple sheet of paper, written with steady, clear letters. I will never sew for someone who does not respect my hands. Not because I no longer want to sew, but because at my age, I have learned that work is most valuable when born of love, not obligation, and that anyone who cannot appreciate a stitch does not deserve the dress. Sometimes the neighbors ask me if I regret what I did. I tell them no. If life has taught me anything, it's that respect is earned when you stop begging for it. I did not speak to destroy anyone. I spoke to rebuild myself. And in doing so, I wove an example for others. If even one woman hears my story and finds the courage to say enough, then everything was worth it. Today, as I look out the window, I watch the sunset paint the sky in the same shades as the thread I have always used, gold, orange, dusty rose. And I smile knowing that every thread I used, every tear I shed, was necessary to live this life, my life. The thread remains in my hands, but the scar rests in my soul, reminding me that even the smallest stitch can bind not just fabric, but destinies. And so, at 66, with a peaceful heart, I close my story as one finishes a perfect seam, with the last knot, strong, discreet, invisible, holding together everything seen and unseen. Because in the end, life, like sewing, is just that, a thread that joins wounds and turns them into beauty. Sometimes life humiliates us to remind us what we are made of. I have learned that hands that sew can also mend the soul, and that no wound hurts more than forgetting our own worth. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. Your support allows more voices like mine to be heard.